So today's reading is from John 15, verse 12 to 17. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learnt from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you may go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Nice. Thanks, Grace. Good evening, everybody. Hello. Something that I have learnt recently about running is that you have to be a little bit stubborn. That's my opening remark for you there. Something I've learned about running is that you have to be stubborn, but what I've realized is that there are two types of stubbornness. You have the good type. That is the voice that pushes you to not give up. It keeps you focused beyond the momentary pain. You must never give up in order to achieve the goals that you have set. But then you also have the bad type of stubborn. The voice that says, nah, this is actually not enjoyable. I have better things to do than this, so I quit. Unfortunately, I am the latter. Around 20 minutes on the treadmill, my brain just goes, no, I don't want to do this. I'm totally over this. And it's then impossible for me to muster up the willpower to push through and do any more. I'm hoping that there are a few people in the room who can resonate with that with me. But last week, John launched our new sermon series, which we're calling Can I Get a Witness? And our talk today is titled Stubbornly Loyal. Given that stubborn can sometimes be perceived as a negative characteristic, it might be surprising then to attach it to this positive adjective such as loyal. But this is exactly what I think Jesus is advocating for in the reading that we heard. Love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. To lay down your life for a friend seems pretty stubborn to me. To give all that you have and all that you are, to see the flourishing of another is no half-hearted thing. As we move through the rest of this series, we're going to be addressing God's purpose and his call over our lives. But it's so important to remember that when we say yes to following Jesus, we are also saying yes to one another. We are saying yes to his church. And when we talk about being apprentices to Jesus, when we use language here at St. Mary's about following the way, about playing our part in the renewal of the city, we don't do this in isolation. And so we're going to be looking at today what it is to be formed together, what it is to be a stubbornly loyal community as followers of Jesus today. Does that sound all right? Lovely. What is helpful to begin with is if we take a step back and look at the wider picture, because we're not doing this in a bubble, we're not doing this in a vacuum. If we take a look at the culture we find ourselves a part of, there is a significant study and evidence towards the primacy of the personal over the collective self. It is very much expected that we live our lives for the sake of our own personal flourishing. One study noted that people who live a transient lifestyle, who move houses, cities, jobs regularly, pursue duty-free relationships. And they run from obligatory relationships. They can get away with only going surface level with people. Often these relationships are driven by the desire for self-esteem, to find people similar to ourselves that make us feel better about ourselves. So we hide from the depth found in interpersonal relationships because there's no need to put down roots. And it's then possible to avoid commitment and investment into the lives of other people. And anyway, this commitment would also just demand our attention that we are investing into our careers, our image, or even just our own self-preservation. Worse still, sincere community involves honesty, which in turn holds up a mirror and exposes our shortcomings. And we don't like to be faced with our imperfection. It requires effort to address. We know that time and effort are in short supply when we're either constantly exhausted from the pace of life or our schedules are orchestrated down to the T in order to maintain this ever-increasing, ever-exhausting trajectory of self-development and self-improvement. Are we all filled with hope and joy at that? Yeah? Great. I'll keep going. It would be easy to stand here and say, oh, this is a culture thing. This is something that happens to people out there. But I think many of us are guilty of this overstretching, over busyness that leaves us distracted and burnt out and non-committal in all the places where it actually matters the most. We have even fallen victim to this individualized language of my personal relationship with Jesus. And now there is nothing wrong with pursuing that personal relationship. But when that is all that we are pursuing, for the sake of ourselves, we are just as much in danger of being swept up in all of this stuff. But we, the church, we actually have something different to say. Jesus always presented that there was a different way to be within the status quo, that there was always more on offer than what was experienced at present. There is a better way to live in our modern times. And one way of approaching this, one way of articulating this better way of living has been done using the phrase creative minority. It comes from a book by Heather Grizzle and John Tyson. They have defined a creative minority as this: a Christian community in a web of stubbornly loyal relationships, knotted together in a living network of persons who are committed to practicing the way of Jesus together for the renewal of the world. What they go on to articulate in this book is that a gathered group of people, confident in who they are, inspired by who made them, and cheering each other on from a place of deep relationship, has way more of a lasting ripple effect in society than individualized and sometimes exhausted mavericks. This is who we are, a church that is bonded together, acknowledging our differences and pointing towards that something more. And as part of that, we are a church that does not abandon or accuse, but participates in the challenges and the flourishing of society. This is what it is to be stubbornly loyal, loyal to each other and loyal to our world. So, how do we go about living this out? Like all good statements, this definition of creative minority, it explains to us a how and a why. If we look at the breakdown of it, we have this collection of people. If we have the definition just to come up again, yeah, lovely. This web of stubbornly loyal people knotted together, committed to practicing and carrying out something practical. This web of stubbornly loyal relationships, it's laid out in the book as authentic community, meaning that we opt into accountable unity, devoting ourselves to the well-being of one another, as opposed to just loose networks, which look like something of what I described earlier. A loose network is consistent of individualism, selfish ambition, and even sometimes a fear of rejection. Whereas authentic community is built on mutual understanding, collective vision, and even healthy challenge. How do we build this? How do we do this? Well, I think there are many aspects that make up establishing this kind of community, but for us today, I believe there are two main ones. So those two aspects for us today are time and honesty. So much of the New Testament is scattered with stories of the newly formed community of Jesus followers living alongside each other. They carried out the direction given from Jesus to love one another. And in the book of Acts, which talks about the early church, we read of how every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Every day. Every day. For some of us, that is a terrifying thought of spending every day with the same group of people. But I think this points to the necessity of commitment. In order to experience the depth of connection that we long for, it requires an investment of time and resources. The early church was about more than just words. They carried out love towards each other through actions and where they spent what they valued the most. If we return back to the passage from John, verse 15 reads, "I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you." Jesus talks about this movement from servant to friend. But this came from an opening up, a sharing of himself in order to establish that move of relationship. There is a need to give of one's whole self that can perhaps make us a little bit vulnerable. But it is in this vulnerability, in this honesty, that relationships are forged. We move from strangers to friends. It's important to establish and understand that a level of authentic community, of being a creative minority, does not necessarily equate to total 100% agreement with each other. The forging of relationships also comes from a growing through conflict, through challenges, and through disagreement. But with time, honesty, and the genuine desire for Jesus to be at the center and to do these things well, I believe that we have even more scope to point towards this different way of living. So, when we look at ourselves specifically in this context as part of St. Mary's Church, how do we live this out? How do we operate on this level? Well, you may have heard in some different spaces or sometimes on Sundays, we talk about this crowd, company, and core. And it takes influence from how Jesus lived his life and carried out his ministry, the different sort of groups that he was completely a part of. And so we have crowd, which is that bigger scale of people, that bigger body of people that would gather around him and listen to his teachings and learn from his influence. And that is here. That is Sundays, where we gather together as one big community and learn and listen, not only from the front, but to each other and what God and His Spirit is doing. That is community. But then we have company, which we call here tables. But it would be more what Jesus' disciples were. That smaller group of 12 people or more. Not too many more, because you can't have that kind of depth of vulnerability and honesty. But these are the people who know what you do for work. These are the people who know about your family. These are the people that you learn more directly alongside, and that you listen and pray for each other. These are the places that fuel you and keep you going throughout the week. And then finally, we have core. And it was noticed that Jesus had an even more particular relationship with two of his disciples. And for us, these are the places and spaces of the people that really know us, who really know our Achilles heels, the things that really get us, but the things that we are pursuing, the things that we are holding out for and praying for specifically. All of this is community, and all of this is possible to learn and look ahead at who Jesus is forming us to be. And I would say my core, particularly even from meeting and praying together just over the last year, they know more about me than some people who have known me for the whole 30 years of my life. But this is because each of us have made a choice to show up and be honest. Be honest about life's challenges, whilst also pushing each other to grow into becoming more like Jesus and do the things that he did. In order to see the transformation that God has invited us to be a part of, it requires more than just showing up on a Sunday. It requires engaging ourselves with a company of people who are running towards the same thing, albeit perhaps in different ways. It requires people in order to stop us from hiding or coasting or pretending. I know that what I've said can sometimes feel like I'm just telling you to do more, and that's kind of the opposite of what we said at the start, of being busy, of having schedules that are packed in. But there is a book by a Japanese theologian the Japanese theologian is called Kosugi Koyama, and the book is called The 3 Mile an Hour God. And in this book, he asks the question, what speed is love? The speed of love, he says, is 3 miles an hour, a walking speed. Koyama proposes that this is the pace that the Israelites took as they walked through the desert for 40 years. Then that's how long God chose to teach them about himself. The lesson was slow and steady. If we look at Jesus' ministry, it was a walking pace ministry. He was led by moments of interaction and understanding with people. We have the woman at the well. We have the friends who lowered their paralyzed friend through the roof. We have the woman who touched the hem of his clothes. These are all powerful moments of encounter that wouldn't have happened if Jesus had been restricted by a tight schedule. Now, I did a little bit of investigating and confessed this morning as well that it was actually just procrastination. But I couldn't really get my head around what 3 miles an hour felt like. So I did the math. I worked out what this is in beats per minute. And I think we have just an audio of what 3 miles an hour would be at a walking pace. Sarah, have we got it? Just sit with it for a minute. Can you imagine yourself walking every day at this pace? Can you imagine yourself walking through the crowds of West Quay? Left, right, left. I think some people would get angry at you for walking at this pace. I said it this morning and I feel it every time, the frustration rise up in me. as you just try and stick to this beat. Thank you. The speed of love is much slower than what we are used to. We can't notice or be completely present when we move at speed. To love each other as God has loved us, we have to change the tempo that we walk to, the rhythms that we are living out. We have to make a choice to engage with the people around us, committing our time and being honest with each other. So then the why. Why would we choose to live like this? Well, because of what we have encountered, because of the love that we have experienced ourselves, and because of the invitation that is there for each of us. Living in such a way is remarkable. It is countercultural. It provokes people to ask why. Why are you doing this? Who are you doing this for? I like the way that it is written in the Creative Minority book. They say, the focus of Creative Minority is not on economic systems, legislation, sexual morality, or maintaining positions of cultural power. Rather, the tangible focus is on creating disciples of Jesus in radical community who are financially courageous, remarkably fruitful, and humbly in the service of those around them. Yes, we hope to see unjust structures of society reformed. Yes, we dream about seeing broken homes restored. Yes, we work for the lonely and the isolated and the exhausted to experience breakthrough, but we hope that these things are the fallout of stubbornly loyal and remarkably faithful people. What brings me so much joy and makes me so proud is that this is not some far off, aloof goal for our church. We can see this effect of stubborn loyalty at work in this community already. We heard it in many of the baptism stories from the other week. It was the people and the commitment towards those individuals that drew them into knowing Jesus better. There are many stories in this room of people either opening their home or being the recipient of an open home or being safe spaces for others. There are individuals in this church who have supported families in fostering, adoption, and even just general parenting. There are meal trains and prayer gatherings that happen for those in need. And what I don't think we properly realize is just how powerful those acts of love are and what they speak of. The knock-on effect of this is that if there was more of this, if each of us took this seriously, I think we would see a cultural overhaul in schools, in offices, in universities, on building sites across the city. I think others would see something different in a community that lays down its life for one another and wants to ask why that is. And we can meet them with that same invitation that has been extended to each of us. And so maybe just as the band comes up, I want to finish by sharing about a poet and an author. His name is Wendell Berry, which is a beautiful name. And he writes extensively around the famous verse, God so loved the world. Berry is hugely successful in literary circles, widely read, very popular, and it would have been very easy for him to move to a big city like New York or California, but instead he chose to live and root himself in a small community in Kentucky. The way he understood things was that in order to love the world, one must be embedded within it. And he writes this quote, no matter how much one may love the world as a whole, one can live fully in it by only living responsibly in some small part of it. Where we live and who we live there with define the terms of our relationship to the world and to humanity. in order to experience the depth of relationship that we are longing for, in order to see growth and transformation in ourselves and others, we have to be present within it. And we have to do it alongside others. This was what was said in our reading, the commandment that Jesus gave. Love each other as I have loved you. Lay down your lives for each other. It doesn't get any more direct than that. So maybe this is something that comes naturally to you. Maybe you are just naturally one of those people that gathers people, has them in your home, looks for those on the fringes. Or maybe this is totally new to you, and actually something like joining a table might be the first step along the way of this. But I would say today is a moment to take note, to maybe hit reset on how we approach this. For each of us as stubbornly loyal people, we have a place. We have a contribution. We are knotted together, pursuing Jesus together for the renewal of our world. Amen. Amen.